After 2.5 years of pretty good success, what had happened was I got complacent, and I really dropped the ball on a project, and I had some fairly profound consequences for a customer for a short period of time. Nothing too serious, but it was an issue at the time, and at that point, feeling a bit low. But how good the organisation was really showed through how my then line managers supported me through that phase. They knew what I was capable of. It always starts with the why, and that's not always clear to everyone with whom you're working, both your colleagues if you're at a partner organisation for a customer, or certainly within the customer organisation itself. So the first thing to get very clear, whether it be from the brief from the senior execs of the customer, or whether it be briefs from your own senior colleagues, understand really what the purpose is for the piece of work that needs to get done. I always start with the position, and I don't really know where this came from, but I always start with the position that my team are smarter than me.
Yeah.
And so whether it's a team I've inherited or I'm growing, those individuals are going to be in their positions on merit. So it's very important to understand that as a starting point. And yeah, as a leader, I'm steering, I'm guiding, I'm providing support when required. But it's my team that are doing the real work.
Yeah. Welcome to this week's episode of Akoni Tech Talks. We are joined by Craig today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm excited to delve into your career and your insights, Craig. But let's start with the fact you've had an impressive 25 years in technology and business transformation. But can you share how you first got started in the field?
Sure. I joined my first organisation after university as an undergraduate trainee scheme. That was with a company called Powergen in the UK. Now E.ON, the large energy organisation. I was recruited into the IT team and ended up being one of the most trained graduates in the company's history. Sadly, that didn't prove to be value for money for them. I really couldn't learn to code very well. It was clearly not for me. After about 18 months, I was assigned to a project doing something completely different to programming. There was a reorganisation taking place. They needed a graduate to help them, and I really got the buzz for project management. That then continued for a few months, and I thought I really wanted to get into that a lot more. There wasn't the opportunity to do that. At Powergen, I saw a role at Computer Centre that was involved in services implementation. So that's more on the softer side of IT rather than the technical side. Got that job and then spent 4 years with them. Very positive experience with them, working on various different projects, and it was really a very formative experience for that time.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of the pivotal moments or challenges you faced earlier in your career that sort of shaped your approach to leadership and transformation?
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of mostly positive experiences in those at the end of the first role, and then certainly during those 4 years at Computer Centre, mostly positive. I was assigned to various projects of increasing scale during that time, and built up a fairly good reputation in terms of successful delivery of various projects across multiple different verticals, different sizes of organisation. I was able to work with very different individuals and very encouraging and supportive stakeholders. I was very fortunate with some of the people I worked around, but there was also a low point in that 4 years, which was a very good learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
After 2.5 years of pretty good success, what had happened was I got complacent, and I really dropped the ball on a project, and I had some fairly profound consequences for a customer for a short period of time. Nothing too serious, but it was an issue at the time, and at that point, feeling a bit low. But how good the organisation was really showed through how my then line managers supported me through that phase. They knew what I was capable of, and they saw it was a one-off mistake. So on the next project, it was a really big deal. It was a very important government deal. I was working underneath a very experienced program manager at that time, and that really recovered my position in terms of my capability, built up the confidence again, and at the end of it, I was then being assigned the biggest transition project the company had ever done, and that was the last piece of work I worked on before I moved on from there. So broadly very positive, but really learned from my mistake in that time as well. That really taught me never to too complacent about my capability at any time.
And in terms of your learnings and your experience, you're known for a leadership style that's sort of grounded in empowerment and trust. But how did you develop this approach, and what advice would you give to aspiring leaders in tech?
So what I realized only very recently is that style of leadership was really provided to me during that time in those first few years. I only realised a long time afterwards that the sort of leadership I was experiencing, and the encouragement and frankly the trust that was put in me at a fairly young age, and clearly there was a belief that I was capable of doing more than I was doing at any point in time. That is what I then subsequently started doing many years after that time, because it was a very long time before I became a line manager or leading a team, never mind a large organisation. After that time, 20 years ago. So it really came down to those individuals, how they treated me, the trust they gave me, the ability to work with a really wide variety of senior stakeholders. The very first project I worked on, I had to work right at the right-hand side of the customer CIO. It was a car rental organisation, globally well known, and that CIO was also similarly very, very supportive in that very first project that I did. So having the right mentors, having the right leaders around me, and having exposure to some fairly senior individuals, such as the company chairman on a Y2K project, for example, it was very, very formative in its basis and taught me a lot of grounded lessons. I always knew that after having left that organisation, they were very much the best organisation I worked for at the time. And I thought that was just because of the type of work that I did and who I was working alongside. I never really made the connection to the leadership part until I became a leader myself, and then realised the behaviours I was exhibiting were very much in line with what I'd seen 20 years previously.
Absolutely. And for people who are kind of just starting out their careers, or they're not quite at that leadership position yet, the thought of digital transformation can be very overwhelming, and even for many organisations as a whole. But how do you simplify and guide businesses through that kind of complex transformation process?
It always starts with the why, and that's not always clear to everyone with whom you're working, both your colleagues if you're at a partner organisation for a customer, or certainly within the customer organisation itself. So the first thing to get very clear, whether it be from the brief from the senior execs of the customer, or whether it be briefs from your own senior colleagues, understand really what the purpose is for the piece of work that needs to get done. So going back to that car rental organisation, that very first project, it never appeared to me to be a very unusual question to ask why we were doing the project. Now this project was only 3.5 months in duration. It was a few £100,000 in value. It was transferring services from the customer to my own organisation. But the first question I asked of the kick-off meeting was, why are we here? And most people in my own organisation at the time answered the question, we're here to do X, Y, and Z. That's not why we were here, that's what we are doing. So I turned to the CIO and asked him the question, why are we here? The reason why we were here is because the work we were doing is non-core to that customer. Computer Centre are better at doing it than they are. Releasing this work from their own organisation allows them to do other things. That level set the meeting, and then everyone knew exactly where we were. I've always used then that principle for every other transformation, regardless of its scale, as the starting point. So let's just understand why it is we're here and what we're looking to achieve. Then the next thing to move on to is, let's see how each of the individuals involved, whether it be directly in terms of the work, or who are impacted in either in a positive way from the transformation, relates to that. So a lot of the early work required in the transformation is getting people on site and understanding how they can relate themselves to what is being worked on and the outcomes looking to be achieved. And it's really important to get that connection on an individual level. The technology and the process and all of that sort of thing is never normally the reason why anything would go awry. It tends to be the lack of investment in the personnel side of things that engenders potential doubt, risk. There's always a sense of threat. People generally don't like change.
Yes.
So it's really important to get over that and make that connection on an individual level. If anyone can see what they are doing on their own in their own role, they can make a link to what then can be achieved as an outcome. That's a very powerful way of explaining why anything should get done. People are generally more motivated if they can make a personal attachment alongside their professional obligations to anything being done, and I've seen a lot of success from that. If that isn't done at the start, you're always kind of going to be working in in a negative position as you move. So the people are always the centric. I've never found necessarily the technology or the process or the governance or the compliance or whatever it is to be that onerous, because that tends to be fairly level set. Yes, you have bugs and yes, you have issues and that sort of thing, but it's the people who are core.
Yeah, and in your experience, what emerging technologies have had the most transformative impact on businesses in recent years? I mean,
in my roles, I've never been particularly technical. I've had to work in technology for a long time, but I've tended to not have the hands-on. Going back to my first role, I couldn't find programming to be anything I was really that good at. So I've always been a lot more appreciative of the technology and what it's capable of doing, as opposed to how it works itself. I've been very lucky to have very clever, technically focused people working around me or for me for a number of years. So in my experience, in terms of what's been very transformative, is anything that really it can deliver very good customer experience and very good employee experience, and that tends to be in automation, that tends to be in workflow, it tends to be in enterprise systems, those sorts of things. Anything that typically in my experience, I've had a lot of projects do this, anything that relates to shift left has very, very positive outcomes. So shift left in its simplest terms, for those who are not familiar with the term, it really sort of brings forward in an end-to-end process more and more of the work, such that, for example, rather than someone resetting your password for you, you do it yourself. Rather than a development team fixing a bug, it's something that can be accepted or automated or redone by a first-line support team. That means that everywhere in the chain between user and the last line of work from a support point of view are doing higher value work at any point in time. So there's less time fixing things, more time developing great features. There's less time spent on a phone call fixing an issue. There's more time following up on customer feedback. Those sorts of things. They have a very profound impact, and I've been very lucky to work with lots of different projects that have delivered that in different ways. And as an often very frustrated customer of a supermarket or a bank or something, that also touches on a particular personal note. So if there's anything I can be doing for other people that fixes that sort of thing, there's that personal connection to the professional aspect. There's a simple connection there that allows me to go do some good work.
Yeah, and in line with current tech trends, what do you think leaders should be focusing on? Obviously we talk a lot about AI, but what do you think is going to have the biggest impact?
So again, talking on the technical side, there's obviously a lot of talk about the AI piece that's coming along and really what that's going to mean. I think there's a lot of scaremongering going on right now. I think a lot of people are much more afraid of these technical changes and the transformations that are taking place than would have been done previously with anything around IT. So I think as leaders, there's a real responsibility to again look at the people, really look after their teams and understand what they're going through. I don't think the changes that are being voiced in some places are going to be as catastrophic as they might be. Every significant industrial technical revolution has tended to create more jobs than it's removed. This time, though, people's fears are a little more different, because they've seen quite how impressive AI can be. And to a lot of them it's scary, and I equate that a lot in some ways to what people were feeling either during or just after the pandemic. And some of my teams felt a genuine sense of loss in terms of not being able to be in an office. Most of my teams were able to adapt very well, and partly that was because we had a very healthy hybrid way of working anyway, so moving to lockdown was not as much of a shock as it would have been to other teams. But even within that team, there were people who were genuinely loving going to the office 5 days a week. Was part of how they identified with themselves. So seeing that sort of behaviour and being able to address that sort of individual concern I think needs to be replicated when it comes to what's happening in AI.
Mm-hmm.
My own view is that I think AI is going to make people be more effective in their jobs and take away those low value tasks they don't really like doing, and become more effective and drive much better work and deliver much higher quality outcomes, rather than take away their actual role itself. I don't really see it taking. There are certain things will go, but they will be replaced with much more productive and higher value work, and will genuinely take us forward. But so leaders need to be very cognitive that not everyone is fully into the next great thing. They're not fully into what the next app on their iPhone is. To some of them, that's actually a scary moment.
Yeah.
And that's got nothing to do with age, it's got nothing to do with experience or vertical or anything. A lot of people react quite negatively to that, and I think that's much more enhanced post-COVID.
Absolutely. And keeping on the theme of, looking at your own view, if you could work on solving one global challenge using tech, what would it be and why?
I think it has to be in the sustainability space, simply because of where we are as a society at the moment. I think IT and technology generally can actually look more to itself in what it can do. So there's definitely a lot that can be done on the e-waste side of things. A lot more can be done there, and I think there's a lot of smart technology out there that can really make a significant contribution to that and waste in general. There's a huge challenge around the power requirements that AI is now putting on data centers, and there's some genuine concerns around, is there going to be enough energy there? The short-term view in terms of putting more fossil fuel input into those is really unfortunate. I don't necessarily fully accept that's entirely necessary, but maybe we're a bit behind the curve there. I think there's a lot of work that can be done in that space. I know certainly in this region, all the innovation that's going into that space is coming from the smaller organisations. The larger organisations are not really coming up with anything particularly innovative, but the small players are very much more looking at more point solutions, and aggregating them can have a lot of genuine impact. So I'd like to think that that's where the impact could be best seen.
And speaking of innovation, not only in terms of tech, but as an individual, in terms of personal growth and innovating, progressing through your career, we kind of touched on earlier before we were recording that you're passionate about coaching and mentorship as well, offering guidance. But what strategies do you use to kind of nurture the potential of your team members and new talent?
I always start with the position, and I don't really know where this came from, but I always start with the position that my team are smarter than me.
Yeah.
And so whether it's a team I've inherited or I'm growing, those individuals are going to be in their positions on merit. So it's very important to understand that as a starting point. And as a leader, I'm steering, I'm guiding, I'm providing support when required, but it's my team that are doing the real work.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's very important to understand at an individual level really what their drivers are, what really gets them up in the morning, really what they care about. And it's perfectly possible that those drivers are only remotely related to the role they're doing. They might be genuinely interested in other things. So it's also therefore very important to recognise that maybe they won't be in that role, or shouldn't be in that role, or can't be in that role for positive reasons, and actually encouraging them on that journey. Everyone is at a stage in their own journey in terms of their career, and it's not necessarily just a straight upward curve. It's much more of a portfolio career these days than it is a ladder. So it's very important to recognise at individual level really what the right buttons to push are, and then start pushing those buttons in the right way to help them along as an individual. Yes, there's an organisational aspect to it, but there's always a personal element to it as well, and getting that healthy combination of the two can be really, really powerful. I've been very lucky to have a lot of individuals that I've worked with and have been in my teams that have really grown in their role, and then I've gone on to bigger and better things out with my own team, because it's absolutely the right thing to do both for them and for the organisation. That makes me immensely proud when someone comes along and said, oh, we'd really like this person in your team to fulfil this role. That is a success for everybody. That's really, it should never be the case of, oh, now I've got to find someone else. That's a real positive step. So I take a lot of positive outcomes out of that. So getting that connection between the personal and the professional, I've always found to be really, really important. And back to what I said earlier on, if you've got that personal investment in the success, that's really, really key. One last part on that, I've always tried to have, when it comes to personal objectives,
Yeah.
Of anyone in my team is have at least 10% of the weighting of their performance to be much more of a selfish objective. So yes, you have to meet your targets and deliver things on time and finish these projects, whatever it is. But 10% of their objectives should be much more about them as an individual. Now, that's not to say it's completely unrelated to the company that they're working in, but it's much more about how they can be developing as an individual. And so leaders need to be taking a much more holistic approach to personal growth.
Yeah.
It's not just about, are you great at doing bigger pieces of work and taking more responsibility. I think those days are over.
Yeah. And you touched on, finding those elements that make a healthy combination in terms of progression. But in your opinion, how does creating a calming influence help in complex situation, both for leaders and the teams, especially during these high stake projects?
Yeah, it comes down to being first and foremost authentic. So if there's high pressure situations, it's very important that your team see the same similar behaviours and the same character being exhibited, whether things are going well or things are going not so well.
Yeah.
Whether that be, in my experience, managing a very major incident where a critical system is down, or it's the last few days of a project before go live, having that authenticity in the team. So having empowered and trusted your team when things are going well, they see by default that if you're showing the same behaviours, they still have that trust, they still have that empowerment, and therefore they're much more relaxed and more able to do what needs to get done, rather than panic or pause or whatever and go, this is uncomfortable. It's really important to show that steer. The other thing about being calm in those situations is it lends itself to bringing perspective where it might otherwise not be present. So if someone is speaking in a calm manner and working progressively through steps that need to get taken, people understand, okay, like this one step at a time, or make sure we do this, or make sure we do that it brings a default reciprocal trust in your leadership that things are going to be fine. Losing your cool at that time is just the absolute worst thing that can be done. I also tend to throw in a bit of humour from time to time, because and I would do that when things are going well. So I kind of loosen up a little bit just in meetings and throw in the odd phrase, but I will do that in the high pressure situations to go, oh yeah, right, okay, we're here, we know where we are. Yes, we've got to get stuff done, but okay, that's fine. Because very often if they're in a high pressure situation, you have pauses where things literally can't happen for a period of time because you're waiting for your dependency, you're waiting for something to finish before you can do your next task or whatever it is. Those are the times when you need to exploit that kind of slightly quieter time and just go back and forth normally, and that kind of sort of little more lighter attitudes just brings that perspective into the situation. And when the situations are finished, it's a lot easier to look back on what happened in a positive light and learn lessons from it, rather than just put your head in your hands and go, what was that? If there's been that levity, been that perspective, everyone can move on a lot more easily.
And obviously we touched on coming back to tech trends, that element of sustainability is something that you'd like to work on if you could, but looking ahead, is there an area within tech that you're kind of most excited about in that intersection between tech and business?
I think there's a lot of different areas that tech can really help with on the ESG side of things, whether that be in the responsible asset management, whether that be in power, whether that be in nature data, or whatever it is. There's so much opportunity in that space. I mean, I really don't know where to begin in terms of what could be there, but I do get a good sense, again, from this region. There's lots of great projects going on that are delivering individual point solutions. It's something I've been looking into a lot more, but there's definitely a great role to play in that, and that's what I'm trying to focus on in the future.
And if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice about breaking into the industry, having a successful career, what would it be?
So I would say to my kids when they were at school, don't make the same mistake as I did. So when I went to university, I did the degree I thought I wanted to do, which would give me the job I thought I wanted to do at the time. So, and which was absolutely not the right thing. Now ultimately I ended up doing something completely unrelated to what I thought I wanted to do, but it's been a very fulfilling experience. I told them, study what you enjoy.
Yeah.
Because unless you're going to be a doctor or a dentist or a vet, you can pretty much do any either apprenticeship, or it doesn't have to be uni degree or whatever to get you into a job. So in my first role, we had history graduates in IT. We've had people completely unrelated to the tech. It's much more about character. It's much more about core skills. So first and foremost, don't be put off if you don't have a qualification or you don't have a particular experience. Tech can be taught, but attitude, character, and perseverance and things like that can't be. They're character based. Those are the sorts of things that are much more valuable than a particular certification on a particular tech. So that's the first thing to get on with. Then the thing to say when in role is be like a sponge, absorb information, get out and understand more about what your industry is about, what your customers are experiencing, what your peer organisations, what your peer colleagues are doing, what your superiors are up to. Expose yourself to as much of that as possible. Get a real broad sense of understanding. It's very easy to get stuck in a mindset where if you're very busy and you're doing the same things every day and you've got deadlines, you're not able to kind of lift your head above your computer and take a breath and understand what's happening around you. That's really, really important. Get that sense of perspective, get that broader understanding, and really learn from that. You're not going to be in the same role your whole life, but equally things might never be as bad as you might think they are, and it's not the right thing to do to kind of quit too early. So finally then would be you get that sense of dread or sense that something's not off. You need to push through it the first time. If it persists, absolutely start to do something different, but don't respond or react just when the first sense of doubt or uncertainty comes along. That's not really healthy. The whole point of a career is that you are going to have those times of doubt. You're going to have those times, and it's how you respond to those. So to that first time where I messed up in that project, I was able to first be given the time to recover by the leadership, but absolutely recognise that I'm better than that. That was a one-off. I know exactly what I did wrong. I'm never going to do that again. Yeah. And then a year later, it was a complete turnaround because I'd proven to myself that what I was capable of. So that was very important. So in early careers, you're going to have those formative moments. You're not necessarily going to know they're formative at the time. But if you've got that exposure to others and you're talking it out and you're comparing notes or whatever it is you're doing, having that much better understanding is really, really important.
We come on to the trending in tech realm. So there was a blog post recently which stirred a bit of a debate in Silicon Valley over the advantages of two leadership styles. Founder mode, where leaders are deeply involved in all aspects of the business, and manager mode, where leaders focus on actually delegating and empowering managers to execute the company's vision. But the discussion kind of highlighted the trade-off between maintaining that direct oversight of your business versus fostering autonomy and scalability within a team. But as a seasoned leader yourself, known for empowering teams and fostering trust, like we've talked about, where do you see the balance between staying hands-on as a leader and delegating effectively so you can enable that growth and innovation within your team?
Teams need different styles of leadership at different times. So hands-on leadership does not mean micromanagement, but equally empowerment does not mean abdication of responsibility. They need to see different behaviours at different times depending on the circumstances. It always starts with leadership needs to be giving the steer and the guidance, but generally I find that teams like to be left alone and then be able to ask for help as opposed to rely on a leader checking their homework or stepping in unnecessarily. Understanding where your team operates in that between those two extremes is very, very important. From time to time, a leader will need to step in and do something. People will need support, or something has gone wrong, or there's been a mistake being made, or something completely unexpected has happened. That's really then shows their qualities, shows their characteristics. But if they've been effective enough up until that point, the team will generally know the times where they will need the help or where they don't need to ask. And that's immensely powerful. I always tend to manage by exception. Is tell me when you need help. If I see something I think you might need help with, I will ask if you need my help, not make it a presumptuous decision and jump in and start helping,
Yeah.
unless it's something that's very, very urgent, or or something is literally falling over at the time. So there needs to be that balance. There will always be circumstances wherein you've got to roll your sleeves up and get on with things. There will always be those times where you just can sit back and get on with your own work and just let your team grow and develop and deliver. But it has to be that balance. So one or the other is never fully correct. It has to be somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think, like you say, it just sounds like the perfect balance. So, but we move on to the final part of the podcast now. Actually, I feel like it's gone so quickly, but I'm sure everyone's keen to know what's your favourite. This is the this or that round. So, iPhone or Samsung?
iPhone.
And Spotify or Apple?
Apple.
Netflix or cinema?
Cinema.
And laptops or tablets?
Laptop.
And ChatGPT or virtual reality?
ChatGPT.
And video calls or voice notes?
Video calls.
And finally, if you could bring back one piece of tech, Craig, that's now evolved or it no longer exists, what would it be and why?
I was brought up playing video games for free. I won't explain why. So having video games in my house was always good fun, or down the arcade. The video games I was capable of doing were ones that only required a left, right and fire, or left, right, fire and jump at a push.
Yeah.
So I'd love to bring back my old VIC-20 computer, which only had 5k of memory, but it was perfectly fine in the 1980s to play video games. That was a nostalgic piece. I'd love to see that again.
I love that. Oh, that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Bocconi Tech Talks. Thank you so much for coming on, Craig.
Thank you.